Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the Daydreamcast. I am Bro, and here with me is Cal. Murph couldn't make it. He has got some stuff going on, but we wish him well. He'll be back soon. Cal, how have you been?
I'm fine. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Glad to cover from Earth this time, and we have a colorful array, a shaded array of topics to cover. I'm very excited.
I'm actually I love cell
Me
shading.
too.
I think that's awesome. I love specific art styles and all that. Well, we're getting ahead of ourselves here. We're gonna start with chained echoes. Are you familiar with chained echoes at all?
Not at all. I know it's labeled a JRPG. That's as much as I know. It looks fine.
Okay, well, first of all, this is now there's been discourse brought up about labeling
Mm-hmm.
of how appropriate Japanese RPGs are to the label. How familiar are you with this discourse?
I've read some of the discourse, and like I get on the Nintendo site, it says this is a JRPG. I don't know what the discourse is saying about that, or if
It has nothing to do with chained
okay,
echoes.
not
To
specifically.
refer to it, what happened was the director of Final Fantasy 16 had in this is we're now just talking about news in general,
Mm-hmm.
I guess. The director of Final Fantasy 16 said in an interview that he felt that the label, the Japanese RPGs, are sort of limiting to the genre and what he is trying to accomplish. And this is a sentiment echoed. Okay, we'll be fine. I accidentally clicked a button. I'll figure that out later. Um, but Brendan, previously on the podcast, had went on an extensive conversation about how he thinks JRPG, short for Japanese RPG, is inappropriate, if not borderline racist, depending on who's talking. I mean, he doesn't think if you use it,
Yeah,
period, you're racist. It's more just like one of those, like, we grew
yeah,
up in
yeah.
a different, like, situation, and like discourse around gaming has radically changed, and we're beyond calling it that. Instead, there's more accurate labels. I don't know how you feel about that.
So much of like gaming culture comes from like these enthusiast magazines who very loosely had a string of ethics. We laugh when we talk about video game ethics, but I did read Brandon's discourse, and I think like his response is probably essentially my response. We don't have much regionality when we talk about like the platformer or maybe somewhat in the shooter. It's viewed in a derogatory American way, possibly. During that same time period, the shooter was very oh, that's the Americans, like games that won't be sold in Germany, and just like this is a very Americanized, fetishized thing, like these Call of Duties, which is true. But I don't think it's a good idea to just separate it. Just JRPG, CRPG was the other definition, and why I think people started calling them JRPGs to separate it from the games being developed on
Yeah,
computers. And I think Brendan had good definitions of like what was streamlined about the JRPGs and what was flattened out when RPGs just became more prominent and marketable in a mainstream
absolutely. And
Western
to
way.
also address it, like, to talk about games journalism real quick, there's also been like stuff of like X. Have you seen the X Play clips? Do you remember it? Hey there, guys. Brogan from the editing room here. I wanted to pin something really quick about this conversation because I messed up while recording and clicked a button. So we jumped around the topic a little bit more than I wanted to for like just two big claims I want to talk about. I think the X Play clips are super racist, not just kind of racist or like I do think they are part of the time, but it's part of the time in like a harmful, toxic way, like the state of games journalism, but also like general entertainment. Like it felt very talk radio. It felt very early 2000s Howard Stern or late 90s Howard Stern or like whatever you saw on Spike TV at the time. So like in my head, there's like no excuse. At the very least, there's no excuse for doubling down on it now, which Adam Sessler did. He was like, "Oh, I don't regret anything we've done." It's like, okay, well, you're not even like going, "Hey, man, I fucked up. We fucked up. We understand the issues now," which is, I think, the reasonable take to have. The other thing I wanted to mention was that not only did Brendan think about those outdated terms, but he also did think there were toxic actors actively using the JRPG label. The outdated term and like era thing is like a frame of reference for good faith understanding. Like I don't think Cal is in a bad place when he refers to it as that. That's not where Brendan was coming from. But there are absolutely bad actors that push a negative view on RPGs because they are from Japan and separate what they don't like into that bubble. And then anything from those that they do like just gets co-opted into what they eventually consider to be a normal RPG trope. And I agree with that take wholeheartedly. And I don't think Cal disagrees either, but it was more just like we just didn't say it out loud. And in editing, I was like, I should clear this up, make sure everything is crystal. So thanks everybody. On with the show.
No, I saw it was going around, but I, as like an avid X-Play avoider, I mean, I saw those guys at E3. Like I ran across them at a meeting, but that's about my full influence. I was more of a Tommy Tallarico guy.
Oh well, I don't think that panned out either. I think
shit! Did something happen?
No comments, man. But no, the X-Play thing also goes into like when people call Japanese culture weird, or like when people would talk about Katamari Damacy and be like, oh, that's a weird game. In like a very Japanesey way, and it's like, oh, this is low key a little bit racist or insensitive. You know what I mean? Instead of taking it as is or understanding the intentions the developer had. Anyways,
I was so into like Japanese games and things as a kid, and I just remember being 6, 7 years old and not really having an idea that this was a ugly thing. Like my source of info was like Nintendo Power and Sega magazine at that point. I forget the name, but
we're gonna get to it because I actually think we didn't plan this, but I think Sega is a very like technically it started as like an American in Japan, but like it's a very Japanese identity, and Jet Set Radio is a very Japanese game.
Yeah. I think so. But I remember like my uncle just saying like, what's that Japanese game? And the way he said Japanese just made my skin curl, and that was the first time I remember having any sentiment. Like I didn't know about Pearl Harbor or anything at that point. I didn't know like American history.
But some gears in your head start turning in the back. Like, wait 1 second. Anyways,
it was like Sonic the Hedgehog was my first view of that shade of racism. And I was just like very frightened by it. I don't know why. It was very worrying to me that this thing I loved was such a troubling thing to an uncle. I didn't get it.
I think I would be worried too if someone just became racist over Sonic.
I don't know if it was Sonic, but yeah, something like that.
I believe it. Chained Echoes. It is a turn-based RPG in the same style of the Super Nintendo Final Fantasies or Chrono Trigger. It gives heavy Chrono Trigger vibes and references at the start. It is like a steampunky fantasy type thing. There's like steampunk mechs to it,
cool.
And there's a cool party to it. What's nice is in number one, I think the party members are really well done and the story is well paced to where you get great snippets of who the characters are and how they function in different ways. And then when they are all together, it blends. And then the combat has those aspects, but then it also has this thing called the overdrive system in which certain attacks or moves are encouraged, and you have to like basically delicately balance a bar to where if you keep doing certain attacks the bar will go up, and if it goes into the green it like does extra damage and you get cool shit, but if you keep doing it it goes into the red and you take like double
Mm.
damage and a bunch of things you don't want. So then it's a juggling act where you're like, oh, I got to keep it down a little bit, I got to do this and that, and then like switching party members on the fly is encouraged in the game to help balance the overdrive. And so you find yourself looking at that overdrive gauge and like measuring what the best course of action is, and it makes it feel very dynamic. Even though it's turn-based, I thought it was
I
really
think
cool.
like that's where the divide began for me because I'm a Final Fantasy 1 through 6 guy and a Chrono Trigger guy, and I was like a once these things became ATB systems or active time battles, I was like, well, I like the relaxed pace of a JRPG. That's like a different mode than I'm in when I'm playing a more involved game. But if it's turn based and has those systems, that sounds neat.
Yeah, it's a way to just engage with the things, because like sometimes there will be, you know how there's some moves that you'll never use
Mm.
typically with a character. You might want to use them because of your gauge, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like that where it'll be automated in smart ways. That's always impressive, and like it's not random battle, they're always on like the
Hmm.
overworld map, and when you enter them they're clearly very obvious engagements that are really well built, and also the difficulty is well sculpted. A while back, a couple episodes ago, I don't know what episode it was. I think it was the Eco
Oh.
episode. I talked about the Outbound Ghost, where it was a Paper Mario like, and in that game you have a laundry list. You have like 500 options for how to customize your
Mm.
difficulty, and it was overwhelming. Here, the difficulty customization is a lot more
Yeah.
streamlined. It's a lot more simpler, and you don't have to like it's not like a huge pool that's like super, overwhelming and super customizable. You just deal with what you're given, and it's good. A thumbs up all around. I loved the game.
Hmm. I've also been playing a role playing game from Japan. Should I segue into mine?
Do you want to do Persona 4 first? We can do that.
I've been playing Persona 4 Golden on Game Pass, the system it was originally released for. No, I feel like it's odd to play it on Xbox. It doesn't feel like a game that was like made for a Microsoft system. I do think games have identities and personas that are like tied to like the platforms.
They have a
Yeah,
home.
it feels like a PlayStation game of a certain era to me. Is what I'm saying. That pre-exists almost aside the history of Xbox, but just because it comes from that time and it's developed so specifically and with such systems that are, I think, integrated mostly into PlayStation games of that time. Um,
Oh yeah. No, I totally
okay.
I see where you're coming from. Where it feels like a PlayStation 2
Yes, exactly.
RPG. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
something between like a Dreamcast, like a Dreamcast or PS2 RPG, which is kind of like my zone of tolerance. I guess I'm not going to get into like an active time battle system, but something like this I think really works for me. I'm not far enough to really speak to like a game that's so spoken about on the internet. I'm afraid to like say something dumb about a game that has so much intelligent conversation about it already. I know Atlas fans are so rabid and like engaged in the conversations around their games, and I don't want to shamefully like misdescribe something.
I'm pretty sure this is David's favorite
Is it
Persona. We don't
okay?
want to
Yeah,
upset
we
David.
would
We
not
would
want that.
we would never
No.
upset. Yeah.
Um,
Um, but you liked it. You're generally
yeah, it's
liking
so
it
far
then,
it's my
right?
favorite dating sim I've played.
Um, it's so weird how much it balances those visual novel segments with the dungeon crawling. I personally like more
Mm.
dungeon crawling in my stuff, but like the nice thing about Persona 4 is its setting.
Oh
You know
yeah.
what I mean? It's that small town serial killer Twin Peaks vibe.
But
You know what
also,
I'm saying?
as I've been reading these the Ring novels for our other podcasts about horror movie book adaptations, I've realized that it also has that kind of psychic projection into technology and like a fear of technology lens through like a Japanese overdevelopment of like technological centers or something. But also like put down like
Yeah.
into a small town, and really, as you say, like the size of like those components, I think they work well together. I haven't quite figured out all the systems. I'm like combining personas and not really knowing why or what they do. I'm just trying to protect the daughter at all costs. I really just want to like have like a forward like protective dad relationship with her, and then it's like making me abandon her at home for every activity I possibly do. I have mixed feelings.
Wait, when you say daughter, do you mean your waifu Marie, or the girl that's like everything's great at your
Juness girl.
Juness?
I forget the names. Again, I'm bringing a lot of shame.
Juness girl. I don't remember her name.
Juness girl
Yeah.
is, I think, more officially like the capacity she's remembered in, and I think that's very charming. I hope she has some other jingles or other quirks, but
I like this battle system. Like, do you think it's hard? That was my one thing. Is like you were like worried it was gonna get difficult. Have you hit those points yet? Because like to me, the game is like pretty much rock paper scissors. I mean that combining thing. What you're doing in the Velvet Room is you're combining two things and just seeing if you get you're seeing if you get a new one or whatever. You don't have to interact with those systems. Those are systems to ensure that you have what you need in your collection of personas.
I don't know if it's called a Reaper or something. I had one of those like invincible guys like come down where I realized like
that's
the
not
fight
normal.
was
I'm shocked that happened.
Yeah, I guess David says he's played through whole playthroughs where that doesn't happen, and I got him on my second chance at a dungeon. So I was very shocked by like that sudden rise in difficulty. That was not analogous to the rest of the game, but I do find like the systems are well balanced. I guess I'm fearful like in a RPG. I always end up being a healer, even though that's not the class I want to play, because I'm so afraid of my party dying that I'm just like paralyzed by a fear of restarting things. It's not as punishing as I thought it would be.
See, you'd be terrified. You want to know a dark secret? Persona 3, you can't control your party members.
Oh shit! Yeah, I don't want to. I want them to kind of operate on their own. I'm afraid that I have too much control and I'm not focused on it.
There you go.
So like I set them to healer and they're not doing it, and I'm like, well then that makes me the healer. So then I'm like dealing with a pixie when I want to be using my Valkyrie, which I'm really a fan of. But then I evolved my Valkyrie into like an Archangel. I don't know how I feel about any of that. But yeah, I'm building social links. I'm having a productive social lifestyle. It fills in a gap of things. And I realized
you missed high school life. You're like, oh wait, this happened eons ago.
I was just going to say I'm so divorced from like that period of life. But now, almost half my life is out of school, and it's like hard for me to kind of associate that with myself or role play that again, because I try to lead a student-free lifestyle, which is
no, that's fair. No,
my daughter's a student, totally. And like the only student I like engage with. So
no, I agree. All right, okay. You know the thing, we're gonna go into this because this was the segue I was thinking of, was Persona 4 reminded me, like I liked its setting and I liked its characters. I liked that feeling of a murder mystery in a small town. I think, and especially when it's like the fragile teenagers.
Yeah.
And I think I want to revisit Persona 4 again after I studied finally an anime called JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, a story thing. Yeah, this is where we're going with this. In case you're curious, there is a chapter 4 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a lot like Persona 4, where it's a small town with a bunch of teenagers trying to uncover the mystery of a serial killer, and this is all a lead in to say I am now playing JoJo's All-Star Battle R, the fighting game based on the anime.
Okay, I was pretty big into like the Dreamcast JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I guess that's like my only intro even into like these characters or what's going on there.
It has like a fighting game legacy. I didn't know about this. Like Capcom was like super big into these JoJo fighters. Like I just had no idea.
They're cool, and I like that because they have like the familiars or like the, what do you call them, like the stands. Is that right?
You got it. Yeah, they are called the stands. I would have taken or personas. You could have called them personas.
Yes, I like that connection. I like the hyper stylization. Of course, we're talking about something like cell shading, and Jojo almost has that impression of 3D, 2D, but not quite. It because of the stands and something kind of projecting out of your character like a multi-dimension in the fighting game. Who do you like? Who's your guy in JoJo?
This also may say something about Jet Set Radio. I love the Boston Terrier, the dog Iggy. He is actually really awful in the game. He is dog shit. But I like him for the personality. It's all about the pizzazz. Otherwise I play as Joseph, who does not have a stand, but is young Joseph, in case that's not obvious. But he's goofy. He's heavy into mix-ups. Yeah, I do play fighting games. He's heavy into mix-ups and an unpredictable nature. He has a lot of combat options. Not necessarily amazing in other fields, but he's versatile. And I like versatility when I play a fighting game character, or at the very least, I like options. That's it. And I don't, are you hyped for Street Fighter 6?
Oh yeah, I'm in. I'm having my fighting game comeback with Street Fighter 5. I was a big Street Fighter 3, Third Strike guy, so
there you go.
And I like that era of Capcom fighters that JoJo almost belongs to. I like the weirdness of
that
like
sprite work. That oh yeah.
What else? Power Stone is a weird one. I like all the odd things they did.
They did the X-Men ones, Marvel versus Capcom. They did Street Fighter versus SNK. I love all that stuff, man.
That was a Dio guy, isn't it? Dio?
It's Dio. It's named after Ronnie James Dio.
Oh, good. Yeah. I'm trying to recollect anything about the Dreamcast game. I just remember the style being good and playing through it a few times with several of the characters and like having friends. It was just one of those weird things like...
But for this one, yeah, they utilize older fighting game movements. So you may be like, oh, I'm familiar with this move set. Because, again, JoJo has a storied fighting game history, so they utilize a lot of, and the roster is huge. This is technically a 10-year-old game, brought back for they brought it back, sort of, but bumped it up to 60 frames per second, added like 15 characters, and re-released it for new consoles.
Oh shit!
And it's fun. What I particularly like is the different era. Like, one of the most appealing things about the anime and manga is that each part has a different tone to it.
Mm-hmm.
And this carries over into the styles of the characters and what they look like and all that. Super fun stuff. My only issue is like the later parts don't have like any characters. It's like it's like all of them are from the ones everyone knows, and then like the latest stuff has like 3 characters to it. And it's like, well, I guess that's the way it goes.
I'm reading there are 343 characters in the series, the anime or the manga combined, possibly.
That makes sense. No, that sounds about right.
So a lot of room there for growth. I felt like
there's a lot of choices where they literally, for the DLC, they just randomly pick them, and then you're like, no, that makes sense. You know, you're like, oh yeah, sure, that sounds fun. Like, because all the stands have different powers, and then it's like, oh, how do you conceive of this power in a fighting game? Even like the basic ones, like Dio, whose power is, spoiler alert, to stop time. You're like, okay. How do you make that into a fighting game power? You know what I mean? Without it being broken. Mm-hmm. And so that stuff's always fun.
I think it just works well as a fighting game concept, something like a tag concept, but you have this other, artier version of yourself that could project from you. That's a good idea for a fighting game.
There you go. And again, the art style is really nice. I love it. There is one other game we want to talk about, and it also has, I think out of this list, it has the best art style.
I think, going from, further Dreamcast concepts to like a game that, feels almost emblematic of what we were talking about, which is like a Japanese stylization and cell shading being close to the anime, Hi-Fi Rush.
Hi-Fi Rush feels like a GameCube, Xbox era game. It feels like it could go along with Jet Set Radio Future. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, it is beautiful. it's by a great studio. Shinji Mikami didn't direct or anything, but he consulted on it and worked with the team. And it's what I like about it is it's a Devil May Cry action game, but it recognizes the rhythms and is like, let's make the rhythm the game, and it's
Hmm.
just so great.
It's good for, yeah, like combo linking, and it also borrows, I think, more than you might expect from like indie modern music. And like your first boss is like at Nine Inch Nails, it kind of develops from there. And you'll hear just pop music that you recognize and know about, but also the ones implemented for the game are so close to the mechanics, it all makes sense how it flows. And it's just a cool stylistic expression of, yeah, rhythm, movement, animation.
I particularly enjoy. My favorite part of it was the world. So basically, whenever you hit on beat to the song, you do extra damage, and you always technically the animation always connects on beat.
Hmm.
So visually, even me, who is really bad at rhythm, visually I know when to hit it. I don't even need the metronome. I just know when to hit because of that combat rhythm. But then also that world design, all of the world little bits, the gears that turn, the pistons that fire, are all based on the rhythm of the song playing. And to me, that is so immersive that I was able to connect with the game in a really positive way.
It almost has just like one of those like so inherently satisfying like old video gamey concepts, which is just like he gets like a iPod like locked in his chest, just like through mechanical, like steampunk ideas. It's just like, oh, like this is a part of him, and the movement, makes sense now. There's a game reason for it.
And you're also against a big your big corporation. You feel like a rebel, you feel like a rock star. That's sort of the vibes you get. And you also, again, that feels very Jet Set Radio.
Oh yeah,
uh
anti-authority and anti-corporation. Also, a video game, from Microsoft Studios. Interesting. I think
yeah.
Shinji Mikami also just left as soon as this game had come out and done pretty well for a couple of months in reviews. You're
Yeah, I don't
saying
know
he's
if he's
consultant, but
retiring or what.
I think
I hope
maybe
he takes a long rest.
either a one long rest or like a return to Capcom to have like a guy at Capcom who's actually like developing, something like it was with Platinum. They don't really develop things like that anymore, but
I
maybe they
I
need
think
that
that's
guy.
wishful thinking. I
Yeah,
think people
probably.
want that.
I think we all kind of want that more than that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Uh, I just like looking at like what their Resident Evils have been and stuff. But if you said like new Resident Evil by Shinji Mikami, I'd be like, holy shit! Like that's a must play for whatever other reason. Shadow of the Damned is one of my favorite games of a certain
There you
era.
go.
Which was just like that tour. What was it? It was like Suda and Shinji Mikami and who else was on
And
that?
it had a talking shotgun. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh. Yeah,
uh,
that was good.
and really like dumb dialogue, but also is like built around like a Resident Evil 4 system. So like my ideal is that he continues to make games like Shadows of the Damn Evil Within, which is just like further takes on those systems, which is just like I don't think like Resident Evil 4 was like maxed out. Like sometimes we get something
Yeah.
like The Last of Us 2 and it's like by the time another developer could develop the system on top of that, like the inspiration of that game, that those things will be outmoded. So I kind of wish like we could go back to the past and keep developing things based on like old system developments. I think that would be really interesting. Uh, I don't know. Like, yeah, I guess wishful think would be like, oh, he joined Platinum or Capcom, but yeah, just go take a rest, right?
Yeah. But he still makes the bangers. That's the secret. He's got like the Scorsese in him where he's like, no, I still know what I'm doing. Like every time it's like, oh no, he's because I love Evil Within. Evil Within is great. And he didn't work as much on Evil Within 2, but you're
Mm-hmm.
right. It's like there was a lot of elaboration on a fucking genre. Resident Evil 4, like Resident Evil helped make a genre. Resident Evil 4 helped make a genre. This dude is just cranking them out. You know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah,
crazy.
and I feel like once
Uh,
Resident Evil split from that, I feel like it needs to go back. It's kind of gone back to some of those like dynamics of Resident Evil 2, a remake, that kind of thing. But Resident Evil 4 is like a whole nother system that I find very interesting still.
Well, I mean, I think they also, not to get into Resident Evil too much, but I
Hmm.
think 5 and 6 was like not not where they wanted to go, to say the least.
No.
Anyways, are you ready for the variety minute?
Yeah, we talked about some hyper stylized games. I've always felt cell shading was like the most style you could put into a game. Like it's an inherent style again. Like um, because you're representing something not quite as it is, but a 3D like rendered into like 2D looking spaces and backgrounds. Starting with like blocks of color and then shading them out and then kind of like looping them in and it's kind of like an illusion that looks really good.
Yeah, and it's so difficult because like I think games were figuring this out before film CGI was, like the film 3D models, where there's like multiple ways you could go for 3D models, which is like texture work or other things, but like cell shading is a really smart way to stylize your 3D in a way that doesn't make it age. And there's different styles here. When I wrote down a list and looked at them, I was like, oh, these aren't like a singular cell shading style. They have
Yeah.
different things regarding line work, for
Hmm.
instance, like even Wind Waker versus the HD Wind Waker. Those are completely different looks.
The problem is it's very hard to extract that style because it's almost um as you say, it's almost ageless, and if you pull it out and make it 3D, they just become larger blocks of color. I mean, you can't like go in and like raise the resolution really, because like low resolution blocks and textures is kind of the point of it. It's hard, so you almost have to go with the new aesthetic. Like that's almost the challenge of Jet Set almost ever getting anything else to it. It's like where do you go? We just talked about one that was like very colorful and like some of the like the most profound like modern looking cell shading I've seen.
Mhm.
But I don't know like what you develop out of Jet Set that would make it better. I think if you added more, it would you just lose something.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, Beautiful Joe was another one.
Yeah.
Capcom did a lot of these. Clover in
Or,
particular did a lot of
yeah,
these.
Okami is
Um,
good.
yeah, Okami just fucking slaps, dog. It is so good. There's Killer 7. Do you remember 13?
Yeah, do you
Um,
remember Auto Modelistica? Modelista
no.
or
What is that?
Modelistica? That was a Capcom racing game that was cell shaded that I was a big fan of and nobody else played. Uh,
Well, we got ourselves an obscure deep cut.
oh
Thank you
yeah.
so much for that.
uh,
That's what you're here for. There's also stuff like Mad World. Do you remember Mad World?
yeah, that was strange. That was strange that happened.
I loved its style. It goes into like and that just showcases what you're able to do, because Mad World had heavy violence, heavy gore, and it was black and white, but it was just it's a completely different style than say 13 or
Mhm.
Killer 7. Um but I kind of dislike it when it's a little bit more like slapped on. Like I don't like it in
I
Borderlands
don't either. I
or
was just gonna say.
yeah,
Um,
or Telltale stuff. Like
oh
I don't
no,
mind Telltale's
I was
work,
gonna
but
say
like
The Wolf Among Us is a style I actually like.
it depends. Like I didn't like what I was really thinking of, like Walking Dead,
Okay,
where
I
I'm
feel like
like,
that's only like halfway there. I feel like The Wolf Among Us might be a stronger example of like an actual cell shade look that looks more like the comics. Like The Walking Dead still
absolutely.
it looks part way like the TV show. I think is like the compromise. Like I don't think it looks totally colorful or interesting.
I think color is an important aspect to consider when you do these styles. You know what I
Like,
mean?
would you say like a Sly Cooper's kind of
Yeah, no, Sly Cooper definitely has these systems, and it's interesting because Sly Cooper 4 sort of removed the cell shading to be
yeah?
more high def. You just see a more general focus, and I think it misses out on so much by removing the cell shading. Um, Dragon Ball Z Budokai was like one of the first fighting games I ever played. And nowadays we got like the Arc Systems games, we got Guilty Gear, we got fucking Dragon Ball Fighter Z, where these are highly stylized and focused, and they have like weird they know that the camera's at specific angles, so then they build the models to the camera angles. Mm-hmm. That's like fascinating to me.
It's so interesting to me that we began this podcast about like a regionality of style, and then we got to cell shading, and the two examples we didn't like are the only non-Japanese examples that we named. Like there's a specific like regionality, maybe to something about the way it plays into anime, and this was like first developed as an anime style, so maybe more popularized in Japan. Like our cartoons did not look like cell shaded games look, right? Like in America.
There's even times where you'll see them incorporate like you remember Ni no Kuni?
Mm-hmm.
That's the turn-based RPG
level 5
on the PlayStation 3 Studio Ghibli or Ghibli, whatever. They helped work on it, and like you could see, like it feels like a fucking Hayao Miyazaki movie when you're playing it, and that feels great. That's like, wow. Well,
yeah, I can't think of like an amazing American example of a cell shaded game. Cell Damage.
Sly Cooper is technically American, okay, but it's not. It's not amazing. It's not like a whoa, you know.
I picture that almost being like a Sony thing. Maybe I thought it was more on the Japanese side, but yeah.
Notably, Sly Cooper does have like extended work because it is a Sony product. It does have extensive work in Japan. Like they do like alternate intros and stuff for promotion there. You know, I just love it because it gives a game identity, and that's what's so important about any game. You know what I mean?
Do you find it hard to follow in a system like 13 or say like Automodalistic, where it's like a fast moving environment, or you almost have to like frame the environment differently in Borderlands to like make it readable? Even in Jet Set, it's almost hard to read sometimes because everything's flattened, and then when it has too much detail around things, it's like a lot of outlines at once. Or
well, okay, if we're going to talk about difficulty reading, we can get into the game of the week if you want.
Sure. My favorite video game of all time.
Okay, wait, I got to do the intro. Jet Set Radio.
You're feeling real tipsy, let me take you on a trip and roll with me. We the brothers get their party on every day, because we got to do that anyway. Hey, it's time to get on down.
All right, the game of the week this week is Jet Set Radio. Jet Set Radio is a 2000 game for the Dreamcast. Wait 1 second, Cal. We don't do Dreamcast games here.
Is this the first?
Technically, I looked it up. Technically, Dino Crisis had a Dreamcast version.
Yeah, it wasn't mentioned.
But we played the PS1 version of that. Jet Set Radio is technically, and I would consider it, the first Dreamcast game. And also Panzer Dragoon was a Sega Saturn game. So.
Okay, yeah, true. And then my favorite video game.
Yeah. But the development team Smilebit was a Sega studio formerly of developers who made Panzer Dragoon. The player controls a gang called the GGs, who go around Tokyo on their inline skates, spraying graffiti everywhere. The gameplay consists of a Tony Hawk's Pro Skater-esque like skating system on rollerblades, where you can do tricks in the air, and you also have the ability to tag graffiti. Your main goal in missions is most of the time to tag graffiti on different public property. Vandalism is good here at the Daydreamcast. Is that legal? Am I allowed to say that?
I think we need the censor from the game. Graffiti is art. However, graffiti is an act of vandalism, is a crime. Every state province has vandalism laws that apply to graffiti, and local entities such as cities and counties have anti-graffiti ordinances. Violation of these laws could result in a fine, probation, or jail sentence. Sega does not condone the real-life act of vandalism in any form. Shame, because it's probably inspired so much graffiti.
Boo!
I love graffiti
I'm pro vandalizing. Anyways, when you do it in those missions, you'll be chased around by a police force bent on escalating violence. Wonder where we've seen that before.
Yes.
Perhaps you'll have other types of missions, such as tagging rival gang members or getting new members of your team by racing them or mimicking their moves in their own missions. Eventually, you'll move on from rival gangs to the real enemy of art. Big business. Cal, what did you think of the game?
Oh, it's all right. I've been like thinking about it for the last 20-something years. I've written several reviews about it for websites, and I love that it's so anti-establishment. It's like the one game where like my imagination was like on fire. Like I sat down to play it, and just like my whole worldview like shifted, and my view of art and what I saw in the world shifted. What I saw of graffiti and the purpose of graffiti and what it's saying and what it's representing and what it's against, and that it's always put up as like almost a dangerous task to commit to a form of art, but something about art being like outside the lines, and already being a massive Sega fan, and then finding this is like one of my first Dreamcast games that really made a big impact on me, but also I think the one that's aged the best that I'd probably go back and play today. Also, my favorite score or soundtrack of all time. Like I can't get get around Hideki what's his name, Naganuma's Twitter use. He's been very creepy on Twitter, but
you can find him on Twitter thirst trapping and memeing.
Yeah,
he's a funny guy. But the soundtrack slaps. It's so good.
I had never heard like an electronica used like that in video games, and you go from that to like a few licensed songs that are kind of randomly placed and kind of funny in the game, but just like the whole pace of it, and me being always like a hockey and rollerblading guy, of course, and that being like so close to my life and my interests, and got my sister into rollerblading, and then she like did competitive skating, and I was always into like aggressive inline kind of skating, and not very good at that part myself, but good at the hockey part and interested in that, and just like the movement and flow and the vitality of like what skating feels like when you're like really moving, and how that like is so enraptured by like the animation style and the movement and the large block colors. I just find it so exhilarating still.
I think the presentation of this game is immaculate. I have a claim here, and I want to see if you agree. This you would be the person to ask.
Okay.
Do you think Jet Set Radio is the most Sega game?
I think it's the most Sega game ever made. I also have long had a theory that it's the best development of a Sonic the Hedgehog style, like Sonic being like a movement through verticality and leveled spaces and finding new spaces and levels, but also like grinding through rails, and like also Sega ethos of like what attitude could be from Sonic developed into like a posture of what attitude was becoming in the 2000s.
Absolutely.
I honestly believe it's like the best Sonic game because I don't
with the punk elements to it. Yeah. Absolutely.
Not like literal Sonic, but in the way that like what I wanted Sonic to become, because it's so much better than like Sonic Adventure and Adventure 2, and it just has also its own like ethos and like art statement to it that I think is just so much about what Sega was going for at the moment. Just like that anti-market kind of just like this is like the last go, so let's fucking go. That was so exciting to me at the moment, and I felt like it was lawless, and it was like unafraid to try things that weren't being done on the PlayStation or especially not the Nintendo. They seemed so far away from this until they made Wind Waker. This seemed like a whole other world of video games to me than what Nintendo was doing.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And, like, how much counterculture there is to this. There was even like I'm pretty sure there's like a graffiti press event they did in like California or something, where they got like a bunch of permits, and then like local politicians were trying to block it, but they couldn't because it was legally done.
Yeah,
Just
cool.
It's just beautiful. I gotta say, I'm gonna get the one complaint out of the way. You were right earlier. The way the cell shading is kind of fucks with space. It's only noticeable. It's not noticeable when you're riding and like running. That is a fantastic momentum. It's when you're jumping. When you're jumping, you really can't tell where you're gonna land.
I think movement and accelerationism through this space makes it hard to gauge like what's landable, and also where the screen is going to go, and how the screen could possibly frame a movement up or down when the backgrounds and your character are both colors of blocks, and sometimes they blend into each other, and the harsh outlines aren't necessarily like this is where you're going. I think it's a very hard problem to solve. As I was getting in high school in like senior year, I was like, okay, Nintendo's like, okay, so this is our game testing interview. You pretty much had the job now. You just need to give us your criticisms of your favorite game. And I was like such a Sega fanboy, perhaps. I was like, I'm not going to criticize the game. So of course didn't get the job. So I've been living it through my whole life of like, I could have worked at Nintendo for a little bit. Maybe I should find something to criticize about Jet Set Radio.
You're like, I don't want to.
They offered me the job, and then I said I wouldn't do it. Like, I wouldn't like criticize the one game that they wanted me to. Like, still like a high school idiot, just being like,
no, but that's the most Jet Set Radio thing you could do. A big company asked you to compromise on what you believe in, and you said no. That's punk rock. That's what it's all about.
They asked me to change like the systems of the games to make it a different game, and I said I wouldn't. And they said, well, that's what your job would be. And I said, well, I don't know what to say. So that's, 17-year-old Calvin losing an opportunity to work at Nintendo for a little bit at their American headquarters, which would have been fine and possibly given me opportunities. So that's sad. But I was already in like games writing and writing about games and giving, they could have read 500 essays about what I thought about how to deconstruct video games, but that's fine. If it were Sega, they would have hired me. That's what I know about. That's the truth. That's my truth.
I think even now you're coping with not getting hired at Nintendo.
That's what this is all about. That's why I'm here.
This is a therapy session, man. Are you okay?
Yeah, I could be an uncle that works at Nintendo right now. But,
you could have been. You could have been our source on the inside. Anyways, let's talk about.
The game is horrible to play, isn't it? Like it feels like really junky and like there's like an odd like weightlessness, like when the characters move up and down like in the environment, it feels pretty bad, but then you're like on a rail and like suddenly your character's doing like uncontrollable things that you didn't exactly input, and it feels like what Tony Hawk could have been if it were more authentically stylized and interesting.
No, I totally agree. Now, it's so weird because it's like the one thing I would do is make it slightly more like Tony Hawk in terms of like that sort of pacing. But even then, I think Tony Hawk has its own problems. Here, it's ultimately fine. What I like most about this level design, I like this level design more than Tony Hawk, because the way the game works is it sort of funnels you into momentum sections where you know where you want to go. Admittedly, sometimes it's just big arrows telling you, hey, go this way. But like, as you're going through a level tagging, the police start getting more. They start sicking dogs on you. The choppers come in, or the riot squad comes in. And as you're going, they have like these little set pieces or these little moments where it's like, this is the level's loop. The level has like a road track for you to go down. And if you know how to go down it, you're fine. The momentum's great. For me, it's really only not nailing it, or it's when I don't nail it that everything grinds to a halt. And when it grinds to a halt, it's not fun. Or like when you're going up a rail and then like there's no momentum to continue going up. Maybe the one thing to actually add is a boost mechanic that like Sonic games would later add, where you would just have like a button real quick to give you a little burst of momentum.
I remember just being on like the AOL message boards talking about like how to like loop infinite combos in these levels, and there's like some really interesting ways you could play around it. So I feel like maybe I became like so proficient at the game that I wouldn't have those problems until, like, I think the last level is one that I kind of like seem to hit a wall on in some ways. Some of the design of that, you kind of like go through like these ramps and things, and there's all these helicopters around. Some of that is a little difficult to manage, but also like, are you picking the right character? Are you in the right space for them? And that kind of thing kind of matters as well. But I agree, like more than Tony Hawk, it has more of like an arcade identity where it's Tony Hawk. You kind of just have to keep replaying things and progress, which is a console idea. Whereas Jet Set Radio, I think you could get through most stages. It's almost more like add a coin and then you're going to progress through the game in a staged way. It feels more like an arcade game in some way. Yeah, like you say, there's a development of like what's happening in the level, and it feels like a complete like interaction with the system. In a way, Tony Hawk kind of feels like you just kind of go do whatever, and maybe you do it however many times, and then you'll eventually get all the things.
And it's not just the art style. It's literally like the character design that feels so cool. I love the gang members and their personalities.
Because like Tony Hawk did go cell shaded eventually, and it didn't mean anything. Like it did have American Wasteland or whatever on the DS.
I don't even remember
the
that
cell shaded one. I don't know if the console one.
What a
was,
failure!
Yeah, maybe that's another deep cut because I had the DS version. It was cell shaded, and actually I thought pretty okay. But I think the console one
there was also
kind of
another DS game to go back to the variety minute real quick. They also, do you remember the Grand Theft Auto that was cell shaded?
Yes,
that was the Chinatown Wars.
Chinatown Wars, great. Yeah. Have you played Jet Set Radio on the Game Boy Advance?
I was gonna ask you that today. I saw a video of it playing. It seems to me it's actually by the people who made Tony Hawk's Pro Skater for the Game Boy Advance.
Which I love that version.
It looks like the best you could possibly do to make a Jet Set Radio for the Game Boy Advance, but that's not saying
that's
a lot.
That's not that great, yeah. Because you have to abandon a lot to go isometric, and whereas Tony Hawk benefits a lot, I think, from going isometric. Jet Set Radio, I think, needs its like verticality and direct like behind the back. Like the characters, like you say, are so stylized, and the environments and this like technoscape of like these like Tokyo suburbs are so cool that you kind of just want to be in it. You don't want to be above it.
Oh, and the other problem with the Game Boy Advance thing is just like there's not enough memory. There's not enough memory to support a good song list, and the GBA doesn't have a dedicated sound chip. So one of the core aspects to the game, one of the most essential things is hindered. You know what I mean? It's just, but totally. I totally get it. What do you think of Jet Set Radio future?
I'm a big fan of it. I own the email jetsetradio@hotmail. So if you have any questions about this franchise continuing, you could send them on to me.
Okay, all right.
That's been my video game email for 20 years.
That's so ridiculous.
That is very strange.
That is the stupidest thing I ever heard.
Like the game was announced and I was like, I'm going to register an email. That's going to be mine. I was like, I hadn't even played it. And then I got it in like that Sega GT 2002 pack, and I was like, well, I don't love it as much. I just think the first one's just so specific to me. And it wasn't actually about like the systems getting better. Like the complaints and things you have are just kind of like, oh, that's a charming bad thing about that game that I love.
Yeah.
I'm like the deadly premonition guy on this podcast, though, so I don't have glaring problems with like a game being, hard to interact with.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, I think we're all open to a little jank. You have to, jank is a fine line, and I don't think Jet Set Radio has a lot of jank. It's just got a little jank.
Yeah, it just has enough like in the central systems that make it difficult.
Yeah, but it goes back to like, I think what really helps is that level design, because it's not only everything I just said about like the levels funneling momentum, but it's also the mission structure. The mission structure has you revisiting these levels multiple times to sort of really familiarize yourself with an area, and the different districts have different, like, they take place at different times of day, so you have a lot of variety in visuals and personality in that way. So it's usually a breath of fresh air, whatever mission you're doing, even if you've played it like 20 times before. You know what I mean? The other one thing, how do you feel about the style system or the ranking system at the end of the mission?
I'm trying to remember like exactly how I feel about that. Give me your take first.
No, I mean, I don't think it's bad, because I especially enjoy the fact that characters, like your character choice, influences the tricks you can do, and the tricks you can do influences the score you get, along with everything else. You know what I mean? Like, I enjoy those systems. I think some of the unlocking, because you unlock some of the characters through getting like the S rank or whatever you call it. I think it's called the jet rank. You get it that way, and there's no way to repeat missions if like you're like if you're further into the game. So like in that way, I don't like it. But like otherwise, I think it's a really serviceable system, especially for the year 2000. It's really good.
It just needs a more open-ended like way to like go back and kind of retrace things and practice them, and especially late in the game. But besides that, like I say, when I play the game, I'm very familiar. I've seen everything the game really has in it, so I don't think I have an issue with the scoring. I'm sure I do fine.
It's also like an afterthought. Like I when I play it, I don't actually care. But like I've seen people talk about it because it's like those are systems, and it's interesting that score is measured in that way. But yeah, it's fun. I also like the ability. I like the actual graffiti options you can do.
Do you change yours?
What? I change mine. Yeah. I don't like. I don't do. I'm guessing. Like I always see like that option to like make your own. I'd never do that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that like actually a thing? Like because there's like an option for like a custom one or something, right?
Yeah. I think you could change it.
I've never done that.
Well, you gotta carry it around in your VMU so you could take it to your friend's house, right? And show them your graffiti and go tag the local school. Bring your VMU with you.
Yeah.
The VMU is such a cool, weird concept. The last stand of memory cards, but also personalizing them and making them part of the game, and like having that bouncing little graffiti logo at the center of the gamepad was very charming. And having a visual screen that also just saved your graffiti, I thought was really cool. So yeah, I did try to design some things. I never got really deep in I don't feel like it's a perfect system like visually for making those things on that console. So I didn't get deep,
but this game, and this game's great. I just love it because it's the attitude. It's all about attitude. The core is that. So any complaints anyone has, they just fall. It's like, who cares? Who gives a shit?
They're all systems level, right? Like, I mean, I think we look at like what makes a perfect video game. It's like, is a perfect video game one that never crashes, or is it one that's mechanically refined and accessible, or is it one that makes a statement through like its usage of art? I don't know. I think the latter for me.
Well, it's a question that's repeated a lot. I think when I looked into like Ueda, the Team Eco stuff, where
Mhm.
he approaches games in a design perspective, and it's not about expressiveness. I sort of understand that as a concept for how games are structured,
Yeah,
but you can't ignore the importance of expression and art. And Jet Set Radio is all about expression and how valuable that is to the human spirit, because like the enemies in the game, the thing I secretly love about the story is you start the game against these rival gangs,
yeah,
and
they're fun.
but like they're not really that bad,
Huh.
and you can play as them, and you do other things. As you go into it, you're like, oh, clearly the police are bad guys. Fuck the police.
Right.
And then by the end of the game, you're fighting like record companies. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like you're fighting a guy so obsessed with making money on this like weird record that he thinks has a demon in it. And by the end of the game, it's like, no, he just wants a lot of money. And everyone else is just trying to get by. And the game literally tells you, it's like, hey, these gang members are just like you.
Yeah.
And I think that's just so beautiful, man.
Yeah, I think like the identities of the gangs are also really fun, like the Love Shockers and the not Pearl Jam, Poison Jam. I think they're so clever and each unique and stylized in their own ways. I like the other characters you get too. I like Combo and that other gal that you get. Is Combo the one with the
I like
speaker
Cube.
on his
Cube
head?
is great. What?
Cube is good, yeah. But I like Gum so much that I kind of stick around like Beat and Gum also, because I'm just
I usually just do Beat. Beat is like my go-to, but
Okay.
like I like Cube. I like Mew. That's the one with the blue hair.
Right.
Just they're all good, man. It's just a good feeling. And then like I love the hub. When you come back after a mission and you go into the garage and you see your gang hanging out,
It's kind of
dancing.
Hi-Fi Rush too. Has that little, I wish it had more style in the hub. You just kind of pet the cat, but I like a hub like that where they're just like swaying back and forth, and the character select is colorful and cool.
Yeah, and then like and then the DJ's like, "Oh, they stole your dog." I'm like, "No, not the dog. Anything but the dog. We got to get him back."
Yeah, then Potts is my favorite character officially, who I've used as an avatar for years. A big fan of Potts the dog.
He is hype. Do you have anything else to say?
Um,
Do you want to keep going on?
I feel like I could. I don't know if I especially need to. Like the interactions and systems levels of the game are kind of awkward and maybe outmoded, but I think the rest of it will actually be preservable forever. I don't think there will ever be a point where Jet Set Radio looks bad, which is more than I could say for 99% of the games that came out the year it did. I'm
Absolutely.
I'm a big 2D games person and early 3D. It has its fans and stuff, but like once you get to Dreamcast, that's really my zone. And but I am interested in bringing more of those shows to the Daydreamcast if you guys will have me for you guys haven't really done much N64. I'm afraid to say.
Yeah, we're picky. I don't like the N64 that much.
I don't either. But there are games, there are gems there. There are
Sure.
Jet Force Radio, Jet Force Gemini, I think it's called.
It's Jet Force Gemini.
Same video game sounding.
You don't
game.
want to play Space Station Silicon Valley?
I like that game. Yeah, the systems are bad once again.
Unfortunately, that is a total Daydreamcast game. I regret to say.
I do like it. I would be there. There
You
is
heard it here,
stuff
folks.
on the N64. I'm trying to think of like some outside game that would be funny to say, but like there's that's a problem. That's why I'm a Dreamcast guy. It's like the games are so weird, and the N64 games were so boring, and I was so bored since the arcades went away, and Dreamcast is like, here's one last burst of that. Here's everything you like, all at once. I hope you enjoy it. It was like video games were good for me for a little bit, and then I kind of had some thoughts about quitting the hobby for a long time after.
And look at you now.
Yeah, I quit for years. Now I'm back. Now I'm back
You're
talking
back.
about the same games that I was so interested in.
That's what we all do. Do you think there's a future for Jet Set Radio.
The Jet
Like
Set Radio
not in terms of like, oh, is this gonna last? Because you're right. I think Jet Set Radio will last forever as what it is. You know what I mean? Like, do you think Sega will revisit Jet Set Radio as a property?
I think if they do, it's time. Like there's been like I don't know how many games the last like 5 years where I'm like, that's all Jet Set Radio stuff, and there was that game last year, like the Roller Dome or something.
Oh yeah, that Roller Dome game. Yeah,
that looked fun,
you know, it's so shocking because like I think we take for granted how influential this game is. I don't know if this is necessarily the first cell shaded game.
It is the first. Yeah.
See, that alone, but like all the other systems and its style and its presentation, like even if this game disappeared tomorrow, you can't ignore the fingerprint of just like everything else. It's like, yeah, you look at other games and you're like, this is Jet Set Radio. Yeah, it's trying to be Jet Set Radio.
It inspired so many of my favorite games. Like we talked about Killer 7. I'd come on for any podcast about Killer 7. Beautiful Joe, another of my favorite games. Whole Clover Platinum footprint. We already talked about Mad World and, you know, like that whole No More Hero class of games. That's kind of my favorite aesthetic that games could have. It continues to kind of resonate and kind of pull like... I see a lot of the stylization in other things, and what was there was an Xbox game, what was it called? It was a open world game, very colorful. Do you know what that one was? Sunset Overdrive was a stuff like that seems to have its fingerprints all over it. I liked it. It did add a lot of the same like rail grinding and feeling to it. So you experience it even in open world games, but yeah, I don't think they're going to bring it back, or they would right now.
Okay, that's fair. No, I mean, but again, like you just see so much of it, like rail grinding. Like rail grinding here to me feels fully realized. Like Tony Hawk, it has rail grinding in it, but in this game, it feels like what Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2, that's the rails, like, you know what I mean? That's the rail system it's going off of. Or Ratchet and Clank. Like, platformers learned from Jet Set Radio, you know, in those fundamental ways.
Because it was so hard to bring it to 3D in a meaningful way. And I felt like, you know, well, Mario 64 is great and all, but that didn't need to be the only blueprint. I think this is much more interesting about what platformers could be than that game is.
No, that's totally fair. All right, I think we are winding down. We are at the hour mark. Cal, where can we find you?
thetwingeeks.com and on Twitter at @thetwingeeks and at Calvin Kemp.
There you go. And you can find me at Brogan Chattin, and you can also email the Daydreamcast at daydreamcastinquiries. We also at gmail.com, and we also have a YouTube channel. Now this will be on the YouTube channel, and I will have my own Jet Set Radio gameplay to feature.
Oh, cool.
The next game is probably Dead Space. Because of the Murph situation, we had to delay Dead Space again, but in the cards, it's likely the next one. We'll see what happens.
The new one or the old version?
The answer is both. At the very least, Murph played the original. I played the original. Mm-hmm. Aradin, the guest for the episode, played the new, having played the original before. Okay. So it's going to be multiple perspectives. I'm interested in it. I enjoyed Dead Space. It goes back to like Resident Evil 4 as like an influence in the genre. Like, to me, Dead Space is like the ultimate, like, first AAA game. Oh, this is what fucking everything came. You know what I mean? This is what the genre is now. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that comes from Resident Evil 4. So, anyways,
I didn't get to brag about my previous press credentials. I used to get to go hang out with the Dead Space team. That's my one brag for the episode.
But it didn't matter because you didn't get the Nintendo job.
No,
it didn't matter.
It couldn't have mattered. Yeah. It would have been a different life.
Yeah,
we'd be here podcasting about what's a fucking Nintendo game, like Legend of Zelda Wind Waker.
I don't want to play a Nintendo game. That's dumb. Who plays Nintendo games? Children, I've never played a Nintendo.
Yeah, Nintendo is for the children.
I think we're playing out. I think.
Okay, I need to go play Nintendo with my daughter, so take care.